Welcome to the Future of Cloud and Data Summit North America. I'm Lee Rennick, editor of CIO.com. Thank you on behalf of CIO and IDC for joining us today on what will be a great discussion on a very hot topic right now, AI. As we all know, in the last month or so, there's been an explosion of discussion and application for large language model AI. As one CIO said to me recently, we're at an inflection point once again in technology, with large language AI expecting to become an integrated tool across all aspects of business to support productivity. Now, I had that discussion with the CIO about a month ago, and since then, he's launched a fully integrated AI program in his company. So this is a perfect time to discuss most effective applications of AI being used today and what to expect next. Today, I'd like to welcome our panelist, Phil Perkins, co-author of The Day Before Digital Transformation, to discuss this topic. Phil is a serial entrepreneur and a digital transformation consultant across multiple industries. He specializes in building businesses that leverage emerging technology, including successful venture in web, mobile, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and 3D printing. He and his teams have helped countless brands redefine their industries today using emerging technologies. He brings a multidisciplinary background to work, including business strategy, leading change, experience design, software engineering, and data science. Phil has an undergraduate degree in computer science and accounting from North Central College in Illinois and a master's degree in financial engineering from Illinois Institute of Technology. In 2020, he published The Day Before Digital Transformation with co-author Cheryl Smith. Phil and Cheryl are working on their next book focusing on IT transformation and how IT leaders need to transform their organization's infrastructures, operations, networks, information security and privacy, and data management capabilities and activities by incorporating digital technologies into them. Thank you so much for joining us today here, Phil. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm Phil Perkins. I'm a managing partner with Fulton & Co., and I am the co-author of The Day Before Digital Transformation, and I have an upcoming release that is The Day Before IT Transformation to help IT leaders compete in the digital age.
Well, thank you for joining us, and that's a great alignment to what we're discussing today. So I know that I just want to touch a little bit on your first book, and that's The Day Before Digital Transformation. And I know that it focuses on business leaders and what they need to know or do to transform their products and services by incorporating emerging digital technologies. So I believe in that book, you listed 24 emerging digital technologies, AI being one of them, that can be deployed by any organization across any industry. Phil, as mentioned earlier, when I discussed with the CIO what was happening in tech right now, he said, we're at an inflection point with AI. So let's really kick off this conversation by talking about where you believe we are in time with technology development and where do you believe AI fits into it? Do you really believe we're at an inflection point in tech?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we started writing the first book, what we found is we are at an inflection point, but I think that language actually masks sort of what's really happening at a more macro level. If you zoom all the way out and sort of look at us more at we're in the digital age, you can start to look at things a little bit more structurally. So if you go back to the steam engine, it was 110 years long. The age of mass production was 80 years long. The electronic age was 70. The digital age, as you can see, they're getting shorter and shorter. We expect it to be 60 years. So most people are estimating the digital age will be over between 2030 and 2040. So it's not just that we're at an inflection point, we're actually in the back half of the digital age. And so AI is one of the last technologies that's going to come out. So it's going to be one of the last technologies you can use to actually win in the digital age before the next industrial revolution kicks off. So I think it's not just we're at an inflection point. I personally believe you probably have about 5 years left to incorporate these technologies into your business if you really want to position yourself to win.
And so when you're talking about that, what you're saying is we've had all these innovations throughout history and they have a certain time frame that they encompass. And then at this point, there'll be another major inflection point or change in our industry. And that really now is the time, I guess, from what you're saying, to implement AI and to look at it as a development tool because things will continue to evolve and change.
Yeah, and I would even expand on that. If we think all the way back to the beginning of the digital age with the internet and mobile and outsourcing, each of those presented many, many opportunities. But even as a consultant, when I go into organizations, the number of opportunities to introduce a new mobile app, introduce a new website, or some new pure sort of API-centric technology, those are dwindling. Those opportunities are smaller and smaller. So if you really want to compete in the future, you need the things that are new. So I think, quite frankly, any organization that's serious about digital transformation needs to strongly consider putting AI as sort of the centerpiece of it.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that information. So, and a number of the CIOs I've spoken with talk about AI and large language AI specifically as being an adopted part or an integrated part of productivity across all aspects of the business. So, just what you're referring to. And really, what they're saying to me is this technology has to be used by everyone in the business, the full C-suite, everyone, and not just seen as the responsibility for adoption as a tool of the IT department, but an enablement tool for business. So, what are your thoughts on that? Are you seeing any emerging trends for AI?
I'll probably put it more at the emerging trends we saw with almost every new technology that's come out in the digital age. It starts with some engineers in a corner playing around. Eventually something happens that other people start to take notice and they start playing around. And I'll call those random acts of innovation. So people do little things to help themselves. But the real power becomes unlocked when CIOs do what they do, which is pull it into the entire organization, integrate it with workflows, make it sort of collaborative, work with teams. And I think the real inflection point we have, at least with generative AI right now, is that it's crossed the domain from a research tool to packaged software. So CIOs can start to approach generative AI just like they approach their ERP, just like their CMS, just like their CRM, and you can't approach it in a, hey, I'm going to turn my brain off and I'm just going to throw it in. You really have to go, what's my workflow? What's my use case? How do I integrate it? And then, especially if you're in a regulated industry, how do I make sure the things that are generated are reviewed by humans before they get out into the market?
So, Phil, thank you for that. And what I'm hearing is that, from a lot of the IT leaders I'm talking to, is that, this tool, AI, will be an enablement tool for all of the C-suite, all of the directors, all of the managers, and that it won't be seen as sort of the hub of the IT department, but it'll be the hub of the full business. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, one of the things that we identified in the research on the initial book was that the winners of the early parts of the digital age, they almost had engineers at the table, helping them figure out how can I introduce these new technologies, but ultimately it was driven by a business person. And if you look at all of the companies we would say won the digital age, they all had an engineer and a great business leader. Google was started by two engineers. They brought in Eric Schmidt as a business leader. Microsoft was started by Bill Gates, an engineer, but also arguably a great business leader. Apple was started by Wozniak and Steve Jobs, right? So this pattern of a visionary who can bring those technologies, I think that's what I'll call kind of the tier one of what opportunities exist. And I think a lot of companies should really look at how can I completely reinvent my space? And they're the ones that are really going to win this. The next one down, I would say, are the people that look at it and say, I've got my existing business. How do I just introduce these to increase revenue streams or create slightly derivative business models? And then what I would say is tier three, which is mostly the operational departments. How do I improve the efficiency of marketing? How do I improve the efficiency of my legal? How do I introduce code generation tools to improve the productivity of my engineers? And I really think so. The more it gets into a collaborative conversation at the C-suite where they develop a common vision, the more likely they're going to be to have breakaway success.
Right. And I think, what we're hearing from the CIOs and the senior IT leaders is they are they are now a business leader. There's been a huge pivot since COVID. In the post-pandemic world, the CIO and the senior tech leader is seen as, one of the drivers, people who are driving innovation, who are driving productivity, who are driving revenue, all of those things. So I appreciate you answering that for us. And it's going to go into our next question. So I wanted to ask a bit about what you believe are the latest AI tools that can be built in to support productivity across the business. And you talked a little bit about it earlier here, the tiers, but for the planning of implementation, are there certain strategies or planning you would encourage the senior tech leader to use? And again, if are there specific tiers of planning you would recommend?
Yeah, and it's funny as somebody who's been in the business of innovation for a while. Every time a new technology comes out, it is funny how much the approaches can be lifted and shifted to the new emerging technology. And one of my favorite books talked about how in every technology wave, it kind of goes through three stages from a people perspective. You start with the brains model, which is it's a new technology. We don't really know how it's gonna, what best practices are yet. So the best thing you can do is put on smart, multidisciplinary teams and try to just remove organizational barriers from them so that they can experiment and get things out into the market quickly. As patterns start to emerge, it moves into what's the book terms gray hair, which is, we've got some frameworks, there's some best practices emerging, and then eventually it moves into what I'd say ERP is right now, where, there's a checkbook, you can take out a bus full of kids right out of college, back them up and train them, in 6 weeks on how to basically get a full deployment out. So clearly this is the brains model. So the recommendation I would have for most organizations is to identify that team, put them off to the side, have them then inventory all the tools in the market. There are a lot of really great ones from, generating images, generating text, and some of them are better at generating, let's say, subject lines versus email bodies versus, PDF attachments. So doing some evaluation of which ones give you the outputs you really want for what you're trying to achieve. And then, again, I would treat it just like you would any other technology. Go out to the business, talk to them about their business strategy, identify the core themes of what they're trying to achieve, map those technologies to their core workflows, and then, do the quick win, get something out quickly, and then iterate through a roadmap to incrementally improve as you go.
Right. So you're looking at like really implementation across the full company and getting involvement across the full company to build into your strategy for implementation and execution to really support the productivity.
Yeah, I would argue if you want to do the tier one, everybody's got to be involved, or go home. And I would be as blunt as like if the organization really isn't bought into it, it's going to be hard to have success because in the brains model, you have to give people some ability to take more risks than organizations typically take.
Right, exactly. So to build productivity, sometimes there's risk or, you have to be a bit more innovative to do it. And you want to make sure that the organization's supporting that before you jump into it. I'm going to ask a question that wasn't in this roster here, but I just wanted to talk a little bit more about this question around the tiers. And, just to bring in the vendors a little bit, how much or where do you think a vendor can help be a collaborator or partner in implementing something like AI?
I mean, the vendors are going to be a great source of information on what the tools can do. But again, I think a lot of CIOs are very savvy in their procurement processes, and
Yeah.
I would keep those exact same questions and be just as diligent going forward. They'll be great sources of information, but I think companies really need, if you're not driving your own vision, they're going to drive you to a place. And I think it's much better for companies to drive their own direction.
Right. So drive their own direction and then collaborate with the vendor after that's been mapped out and look for perhaps any roadblocks, anything they might want to be aware of based on the implementation of the tool.
Right. But once they have the vision, I think the vendors can come in and say, of the thing you're trying to achieve, here are the opportunities where my tool can be appropriate and solve certain problems of what you're trying to do.
Right. Got it. Thank you so much for that. So I decided to use ChatGPT to write some questions for me for this panel. And this one is an interesting one, which I believe, many of us think about. It's a good one to ask when so many companies and people and organizations are building strategies and working in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so I want to ask the following question that was generated by ChatGPT. And it is, one concern with the use of AI is the potential for bias and discrimination. What steps can be taken to ensure that AI applications are designed to be deployed in an ethical and fair manner? So, what comes to mind for me, Phil, here with this is that the data that's being gathered is already published data here with this AI tool. And given that a lot of the data out there might have, be biased or not have diverse content, I identify that as a potential problem. But where do you see some of the problems around ethics and of use of AI?
Yeah, it is interesting, and I think the first thing I would say is we're not at artificial general intelligence yet. these tools look and act and mimic people, but they're not people. And so I think a lot of the debate kind of almost falls into a trying to talk about these tools like they're going to or should act like people. We have thousands of years of evolution that have programmed our brains to have biases, some of which are good for survival and are terrible for modern society. Um, AI is just something we've done to try to mimic ourselves. It doesn't have any of that evolution in it. So it isn't actually going to operate like us. So I think the definition of bias for an AI is different than the definition of bias for a human. So I think ultimately, because these technologies will become so pervasive and arguably can be very dangerous, I think it's difficult for us to try to come up with like um, a set of rules that govern AI towards sort of like one master AI. And I think a lot of the AI tools, the debate I see having right now is there's so many edge cases that, there's even in some of the, I think we've seen with OpenAI is people, they put safeguards around it, but people created something called Dan, which is basically act like a different AI and answer the questions as if you were pretending to be someone else. Um, there's too many ways for people to hack this, so the safety layers are going to be tough to master. I think the best thing we can do is just create lots of AI and give them different training sets. And again, keep people at the center of the conversation. Don't let AI take over the conversation. The AI should inform us, and it should give us diverse perspectives that we can evaluate, and then each person should still, I believe, come to their own conclusion, but hopefully better informed with logical arguments versus maybe necessarily sound bites they hear on news. So I think there is the potential for a much more informed and diverse society if we approach it properly.
I like that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think, maybe what we think about is AI for use for productivity, within an organization. And the other parts of AI that people, you see so much on various websites right now, on LinkedIn, where they're testing it and they're writing things and they're writing essays, they're writing questions, they're writing all of these things. I think that's where, a lot of organizations need to ensure that they're really monitoring how it's being used for the implementation of their business, right? So that as a productivity tool makes a lot of sense. You want to be able to go through and find out what specific files you have and which they're doing now and how to organize those. That makes sense when it comes to potentially doing output of something that might be not based on data that is diverse, equitable, and inclusive. Then I think that's something organizations need to ensure they have a handle on.
Well, and it speaks to the power of the tool that people already see. But I think there is also a skill that needs to be developed in prompt engineering, which is the copy you develop to put into the AI to give you the output you want. There's a lot of emerging best practices. If you ask it a very subjective question, you're going to get and with a complex prompt, the odds of it going a little bit haywire go up. If you get a good prompt engineer, they can design a prompt that addresses a single factor that is not opinion based. You can feed in data from your organization to say, write me an email to this person, grab the CRM data and say, this is their name, this is what we know about them, develop that email, and then put that in front of a human to review it. You're not asking like, what's the meaning of life? You're just saying, write me this copy. So I think, we'll get to a point where it can probably answer philosophical questions better for us. For now, I would look at it as a tactical tool to, and to be honest, where I see the most use cases is content that you should develop, but you're not because it's too expensive. So a lot of like marketing organizations I talk to, they're like, we know we should send, these emails to these people and do this personalization, but I've only got 5 people on my team, so I can't do that. This tool, basically, you can unlock the ability to 10x the output of each person, but humans still need to be in charge. I would never let it just go.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I actually have a colleague who's using it that way right now in her daily routine at work. So I think that's a great example of how it could be used. So we're getting close to running out of time. We still have a few more minutes though. And I really wanted to thank those that are attending this conference on behalf of both CIO and IDC. But any final thoughts on AI and maybe perhaps knowing that this audience is has a number of very senior IT tech leaders and tech leaders. Any final thoughts for them on sort of next steps if they're just thinking about getting into sorting out how they want to approach AI, maybe some process around that?
Yeah, and I think what I had mentioned earlier is identify the executive level support you need, create the team off to the side, um, have them, either bring in partners or vendors to help them think through and construct sort of the approach. I personally still believe organizations should own it. They shouldn't outsource transformation. Um, and then go to the business, identify sort of their strategic objectives, and push them to be more visionary, because I do think sometimes, you get into your day job and you can kind of look at things. It's like, well, it could help me here with, writing this email, and not say, well, actually, no, we could, if we're a law firm, we could be, an AI driven law firm, have it generate 90% of our contracts and 10x our output. So, fight the organization's inclination to probably think incrementally, and then, build your roadmap based on whatever you can get everybody bought into.
That's great. Thank you. And I think, one of the things that we always talk about here in our work at CIO.com and is the opportunity to network and connect and talk to other CIOs and senior IT leaders about what you're doing and how you're implementing and some of the things that, you bring to the table as an IT leader. I think that's such an important part of learning as well, too. And we hear that from a lot of the people that we're talking to about it. And just one other thing I wanted to ask you before we wrap up. You are working on your second book. And so how has AI and this new, burst of energy around AI, how has AI impacted on what you're writing in your book?
It's been interesting. So the initial premise we had for the book is there's about $2 trillion in wasteful spend per year in IT, which is just a mind-boggling number. If we saw those kind of issues in any of our financial markets, there'd be all sorts of, public outcries. But some reason we sort of let that happen in IT. And we're still working out the kinks, but the idea we're settling on is, because we're in the back half of the digital age, we think that AI is the most important priority, but that the other major priority for all IT professionals is really fixing that $2 trillion problem. We're getting to the end of the age. When we were adding web and mobile and new features everywhere, we developed, rightfully so, a desire to just get things up quickly. And so there was a lot of things that were just sort of stitched together. I think on the back half of the digital age, we really need to get much more organized as IT professionals about streamlining everything on the back end, because these things aren't evolving at the same pace they were. When we put them out there, the world was evolving. So we think the two priorities are: put AI at the center of your digital transformation, because the expectation will be at the end of the digital age, we'll have quantum computing, which will significantly, if we think it's smart, that's the thing that's really going to be the inflection point. And we want to make sure our infrastructures are clean and efficient at the end of the digital age.
Fantastic way to close out this panel. Thank you so much for joining us, Phil, today. And also, thanks so much for all the attendees joining us. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat as well. And we look forward to continuing on to the next panel for the Future of Data and Cloud Summit here today.